So I've had my fair share of issues with Tears of the Kingdom, but don't get me wrong, I adore it. There's so many wonderful aspects of this game that it absolutely nails, but something I've had my fair share of problems with is the story. From confusing plot holes and gaps of information to the weak antagonism of Ganondorf, there's plenty of issues in the story. So at this point, the game needs DLC. So let's start by looking at the biggest issues in the story. And be warned, very minor spoilers for the game ahead. When it comes to the story, there's many places to begin with for the plot holes and gaps in the story, but to start, I think we need to look at the Sheikah technology, or lack thereof, as all throughout Breath of the Wild, there was Sheikah-made technology of every shape, size, and age, from massive divine beasts larger than a village, to shrines plastered everywhere high and low, to guardians decayed or not, to even small arrows lying about in chests. Sheikah technology was everywhere, and now, maybe not even half a decade later in Tears of the Kingdom, everything is gone, except the guardian atop the research lab and the ancient blades, which just seem to be the tips of ancient arrows. Everything disappeared, and the biggest problem with that is that seemingly no NPC cares or even noticed that it's all gone. From the dozens of shrine quests where people were guarding the ancient orbs or shrines themselves, no one seems to care that it all disappeared. And all the towers, were they deconstructed just to build pyramid towers that break down constantly? Well, many believe that to be the case. The game never truly says so, but many believe all the Sheikah tech was disassembled or returned underground after Calamity Ganon's defeat. But this leads me to more questions. How could everything be disassembled in a short time between games? Keep in mind, Hyrule was obliterated from Calamity Ganon, and the wounds of his assault were hardly healed by the end of Breath of the Wild. So it's not crazy to believe that it should take longer than 5 years to deconstruct 4 divine beasts, 2 ancient flames, 120 shrines, 15 towers, and just under 200 guardians. And that's not even mentioning the giant 5th divine beast under the Great Plateau. Now, we could give the benefit of the doubt and assume perhaps the shrines, towers, and ancient flames went back underground, and maybe the Great Plateau wasn't touched. And since the depths are so incredibly deep below Hyrule, I suppose they could all fit. It's still hard to imagine deconstructing all the guardians and divine beasts. I would like those to be mentioned at the very least throughout the possible DLC. But on the topic of Sheikah tech, we need to look at the Sheikah tribe itself. Despite being a massive role in Breath of the Wild's story and world building, the Sheikah did nothing in Tears of the Kingdom. While we have researchers like Purr and Robbie and Kakariko Village as a whole, the Sheikah are hardly noticeable, and when they are noticed, it's more confusing than helpful. For example, in a cutscene taking place in the past prior to any Sheikah technology, Zelda manages to use the teleporting feature of the Purr pad, and while it's slightly explained in a prior cutscene with Minoru, it feels odd. Another thing that feels incredibly odd is the fact that Zonai shrines also use Sheikah technology. This must mean that they were made long before Rauru and Sonia, because there's no sign of Sheikah life in any form, and they had no reason to be built at that point. It also had to be recent enough for the Sheikah to have not yet interacted with Calamity Ganon. Continuing on, why were the Zonai shrines made in the first place? Perhaps they were made to help the hero on his journey as the Sheikah shrines were, but this works a little weird as the shrines are impossible without the use of Rauru's hand. But how could Rauru know that Link would use his hand in the future? Suppose maybe Zelda saw Link's hand mangled as she was falling, but still, it requires more assumptions than it should. Along with that, we have to wonder when the Great Sky Islands were lifted above the clouds and how. During cutscenes, we can see the Zonai Temple on the ground, but between the end of the Imprisoning War and Breath of the Wild, it's lifted into the sky. And it couldn't be the Zonai for obvious reasons if you've played the game. So we have to guess how all these Zonai structures appeared. Now, I still have a few more plot grievances, but for those of you who spent time on my channel, you've surely seen my past video on why I don't want DLC. And now, I do believe many of my points still stand, but there's many reasons why my mind has changed. So let's talk about that. But real quick before that, if you haven't seen that video, then you should consider subscribing so you don't miss my next videos. We're on the road to 1,000 subscribers and my birthday's coming soon. So if you want to give the coolest gift ever, then my PayPal is at ArcticJack. Or you could just subscribe. Anyway, on with the video. As I said, I made a video about why I didn't want DLC, and to boil down my argument, I didn't like it from a preservation perspective and possibly preventing the initial product from being the best it can. And I still want those points applied to other games, especially the Mario Sports games, but now that Tears of the Kingdom is finished and we've seen everything that it has to offer, I still find myself and many others wanting more from the game that it didn't tell us. I believe using DLC to finish a game after releasing it is wrong. If you aren't releasing your game with all the content you can provide at that moment, that's quite scammy. However, now we need answers. Answers for the thousands of questions Tears of the Kingdom gave us. At this point on, there could be much larger spoilers, so come back after you've beaten the game. Throughout the memories, Sonia talks to Zelda saying how she can sense her bloodline within her. And this would work perfectly fine as it follows many stories of the Zelda canon with the bloodline of the goddess Hylia going from the queen to princess. And even Zelda's sage's powers match up with her supposed bloodline, as she carries both light and time as Ryu and Sonia do respectively, but is strongest with her powers of time as that's where her blood comes from most. However, there's one huge problem from this. Yeah, I'm just gonna tell you there's no baby making after that kind of blow. So Sonia dies, and Rauru dies, yet we see no Zonai Hylian children. This clearly makes Zelda's birth impossible, because with no children from Sonia, no parents for Zelda. Now, as with every one of these, we're left to guess. Maybe the children are always off screen. Maybe Sonia lied. Maybe whatever, they don't show us. And you might say how they don't need to show us everything, and that's absolutely true. We don't need to see the everyday go-ons of the royal family's life. But when you kill off both of the people who are apparently the ancestors of Zelda without proving the fact that they have offspring, this leads to some big problems. Now, despite that, I do have one theory. Provided Rauru and Sonia did have children, those children would be half Zonai, half Hylian, right? Well, here comes another spoiler, so if you haven't completed every shrine, skip over this. But when you beat every shrine, you unlock the Ancient Heroes aspect. This armor turns Link into some Hylian Zonai breed. While wearing it and talking to select NPCs, they tell you that you resemble the hero shown in the Calamity Ganon mural. This means the hero all the way back then was a mix of a Hylian and a Zonai. If you look at the princess in the mural as well, they look very similar. This could mean that the ancient hero and princess could have been siblings, and even children of the first royal family of Hyrule. But that's just a theory. Another thing that needs to be answered in a DLC is the story of the Faceless Sages. Now, I absolutely do not want another repeat of Champion's Ballad because as good as it was, it's just lazy for them to repeat it. But what I do want is the story of the 4 Faceless Sages to be told. During the dungeons, all the sages share the same dialogue and cutscene, and I believe making them wear these masks was just another way for the developers to be lazy about the storytelling. And I'm tired of that. I play my Zeldas for the adventuring, yes, but I also play them for the immersive stories. The Dream Island of Koho Link captured me far more than Tears of the Kingdom ever did, and that's because they put effort into their storytelling. Just because the game is completely and utterly open world doesn't mean they couldn't tell an amazing unraveling story. Why don't we ever learn of the history of Ganondorf with his Gerudo and the eventual portrayal of the Gerudo Sage? Why don't we see Zelda do more in the past than simply drinking tea with her great-great-grandpappy and mammy? Tears of the Kingdom was great, but it needs more. More time needs to be spent. More stories need to be told. And unfortunately, we need DLC for that. Goodbye $20. Or $50 since it's obviously going to be on Nintendo Switch Online plus expansion pack. But hey, it'll all be worth it if we get the Gerudo Vice set. Keep cool, bye.